Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm basically going to be talking about TypeScript, and I'm going to be introducing a few things, a few essential things that you need to know in general for you to be able to use TypeScript in general for your own projects, right? Now, the main reason why I'm even doing this in the first place is because I want to be able to give a clear overview of how TypeScript works and everything before we begin the actual project, which is going to be coming out soon. It's just going to be a little delayed because I'm in college and writing a few papers, and yeah. But at the end of the day, it's going to be delivered as fast as possible, as fast as I can. And so I really appreciate you if you stay till it comes out. All right. So without wasting that much time, let us start by creating a really simple TypeScript file and then trying our hands on a few things, right? So I'm going to quickly touch app.ts here. Okay, so we have this app.ts. Now, basically, let us first of all talk about why TypeScript is TypeScript in general. Basically, the main reason why TypeScript, or the thing that TypeScript is made for, is that it helps you write your code with types, right? Especially with the variables and everything, and helps you run it with types. Now, what this one actually does is it reduces the potential bugs that you have in your code in the future when you start to run it, right? And I mean that makes your code even much more efficient. And if you get into a much fresher code base in maybe a new company or something, at the end of the day you find it easy to figure out your way throughout the code. It's way easier than JavaScript, and also it's from my experience it has been really easy debugging TypeScript project so far, if it's not my project and the company's project or someone else's project. Yeah, so in general, TypeScript is very essential, and it's highly recommended. I mean, in my own opinion, it's highly recommended for high skill projects, or projects with a large number of user base, so that in case you run into certain errors, you find it a lot more easier to debug them, right? So yeah, let's just start. So first of all, let me just create this quick variable. I'm going to say something like student name, or let me just say name, right? Let me say name, and let me make it a let instead. So I'll say let name. What is wrong with my typing? Then I would pass in uh Henry. Why use Henry a lot? Yeah, he helped me run my first startup. I actually quit that one. I'm coming up with a new one actually. So yeah, so we have Henry, and basically this Henry here is a string, right? And so, okay, let me check what is the error here. What is the error? I'm coming. I want to see the error here. It says the name was also declared here. Name, let me make it student name, right? Okay, student name is okay. So I have student name Henry. Now if I try, we all know that let variables can be reassigned, right? Now if I take let variables like student name and I say John, right? If I say this and I say John, right? Now you can see that we have no errors. But if I change this John and I make it a number, you realize that we now have an error, right? Now that is because when you pass in a certain type of value into a variable in TypeScript, you do not want to change the data type of that value. Let's try the same thing with number, right? So let's say in college here we use index numbers, right? So I'm going to say student index number, right? And then I'm quickly going to say 10. So I'm going to cut this out and say 10. Now let's say I want to change the index number for this student. I'm going to say student index number, and then I would say 11, or for instance, right? Now you see that this 11 that we have here, there is no error. But if I make this Henry. If I say this is Henry, right, or I make this a string, right, I make this 11 a string, right, I'm definitely going to get an error. See Henry 2, I'm definitely going to get an error because you cannot change the data type that you assign to a variable in TypeScript, right? Because you're dealing with types. You have to work with the same type throughout your projects, right? So looking at that, right, we can also assign the types to the variables and then later assign the values. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to say let student name here be a type string, right? We want it to be a type string. Then I'll come down here and I'll come and say student name is John Doe, right? Then over here that we have student name is Don Joe, you can see that there's no error that we are getting, right? But if I change this and I make this a number, you realize that we cannot assign a number to string. Do you get what I'm trying to say? To a type string, right? Do you get what I'm trying to say? So but if I change this and I make it a number, so I say index number, so it makes more sense to you while you watch the video. Index student index number, right? And then I assign a number to this new variable. You realize that the error is all gone because this is a type of number, right? Now let us try something with the booleans, right? If I say let a student be if I say let a student be equal to true, right? If I say let a student be equal to true, and then I come and say a student, and I try to reassign a new variable to it, right? When I want variable, maybe I want to say Henry, right? You see that we are having an error. But if I clean this and I change it to false, now you see that the error is all gone. That's because we have already defined it to be true here. But we can also assign this and say what? Boolean, right? And then we can say a student is false. If I change, okay, let me not confuse you. Let me do another example. So it's admin, right? It's admin, and we have false, right? But we'll not give that false here. We'll say it's admin and we initialize it to be a boolean, right? Now we have this. I can come and say it's admin is what? True, right? Or is false, right? Let's clear this part. Now you can see that it works like how we expect it to work, right? Okay, now if I change this, like I said before, if I change it and I make it true, like let's say it's a string, right? If I make this a string, error. If I make it a number, error. But like I said, with a boolean, because we declared it here, it can be true. Now you don't have to always, it's not always that you initialize and then later come and change value. You can just assign the value straight over here by saying true, right? And then you get it cleaned up, or false, still no problem. But definitely not a string, or a number. Alright, you still get an error. Alright, so before we move on to arrays, there's one more thing. So you see over here where we are specifying the type for each and every single variable, we can actually specify the type to receive just two types of data type values, right? So we can here, so let's say we want to say okay, let's say we want to say let student info be equal to we want to say student info could be the name of the student, so Asante could be the name. Okay, Asante could be the name, right? Or we could also represent the student's info with a number. So let us just declare it, right? So over here how we can declare is this, right? So the we want to make sure that it's either a string or a number. So I'll just say string here, and then I bring in my just one stick, that thing, the vertical standing thing, right? And then you have the number following. Now that we've been able to declare, we can now say student info should be equal to 45. It would work. Or let's just use both numbers and string, and you realize that there is no error. But if we do one more and say student info should be equal to true, you realize there is an error. So basically that's it. If I bring one more and I say boolean, sorry, and I say boolean and we say true, you realize that there is no error. Alright, because you are saying that student info can either receive a string, a number, or a boolean. Alright, so now that we know this, we can now move on to arrays. Okay, so now let me just name this pod array. Alright, so under this array here, let's name an array. So student list, right? Okay, this was way too fast. Let's go step by step, right? So want to say student list or student ages, right? So let's start with student ages. So we can say let student ages be, then we can say this could be the student ages. We can say 23, 24, 20, 34, whatever. So we have a bunch of students in here, right? And then we want to now, let's say this new student that came in, and we want to add the student to the list inside the school database, right? We can come and say student ages dot push, right? And then we push in another number, right? So let's say 20, a 12 or something, right? Now you realize there's no error, but if we pass in a string, okay, let me clean this side. Yeah, if you pass in a string, you realize that there's an error. Even if it's Henry, still an error, right? So why is this that? It's like this because TypeScript is saying that this array only contains the type of numbers, right? Now, looking at this, if I change this one, if I change this, and okay, if I change, let me create a new list. Let me quickly create a new list. Let me undo this and create a new list right here. Right, so we had number 12 here with no error, right? Let's create a new list and say let student names be, then I'll say Kofi, Kojo, and Ama and Kwame basically, right? Now if I come and correct this, now if I come down here and I say student names dot push yao, it will work. But if I clean this up, and I put in a number, you realize there's going to be an error. Or even if I put in a boolean that is true, you realize we are going to get an error, right? So you can see that this one also works. Now how do we declare like we declared for the first one, right? Now how do we do that? I'm going to quickly come here, but before that let's try something. So over here I'm going to pass in a number, right? Now you realize that we've passed in a number here, right? And I'm going to pass in another number. Now what happens? You realize that there's no error, right? That's because there's a number also inside this array, and then so since there's a number inside this array, we can also pass in a number, and since there's a string also in the same array, we can pass in a string. If you don't get what I'm trying to say, I am quickly going to show you a quick scenario, a quick example, right? So I'm going to pass in another string here, right? or let's put some things in simple. So yeah, right now you can see, so it works in both scenarios here. If I pass in another thing here, that is going to be a number, you realize that it will pass it inside, right? But if I come here and I pass in a boolean, you realize it's going to be an error, right? So basically we are going to look at ways and means we can declare this thing and change the values dynamically, right? So now let's say we want to put in the student info, right? Okay, let's say we want to put in the student names or nicknames, right? So I want to say let's student nicknames. Let me bring this down. Let me close this and let me zoom in. Actually, I want to zoom in. Okay, so we can say let students nicknames be, then we have so instead of declaring it like this, let us just declare straight. So over here we can do this and then say string, right? And then put this array sign behind. Now that we have this, if we try to assign a new set of arrays to this student nicknames, we want to make sure that all of them are strings. So we want to make sure that all of them are strings, right? So we can say student nicknames, right? Student nicknames can be Kojo and Kwame, and you realize that it would go through because we are specifying it to be a string, right? If I take this and I say student fake ages, okay, let me completely create a new one so you don't get confused. So student fake ages is equal to a number, and then I pass student fake ages to be this array here. You realize that it would also go through, but the moment I mess around and I make this a string, even if I make the number the string like this, you realize that there will be an error, and that's the same thing that is going to happen over here. If I make this part a number, there is going to be an error, right? So how are we going to fix both of these things, right? So let's say we want to make sure that our array is going to take in both a number and a string. How do we fix that? I'm going to quickly come here and say student name. Let me say student name and ages. Okay, now let's not jump too hard. This is one way we can declare it, right? But the more famous one, or the one that I would teach or I was going to teach, is this one. So let me make it fresh so that you see the process. So student names and ages. Okay, then I have this. Then I can say that, let me open this, right? Let me check my mic. Okay, it works. So I can open this and then I'll say string. It could be either a string or a number, right? And then I add the array symbol behind it, right? So then I say what student names and ages should be what I want it to be. What let's say Kofi, right? Kwame, and the last one should be maybe 23. Now you realize that it works, but the moment I add a boolean, there's an error. Okay, so basically that's how it is. Now if I add a boolean to it here, you realize there is no error anymore. Okay, so basically that's how it works. Okay, let me clean this. That's how it works, right? Alright, so let's quickly go into objects. Okay, so I'm quickly going to say this is objects. Now over here I can say const user schema. Let's say for example we are creating a user, or let's just say user info, right? So we say user info, then we have, so every user is going to have what, a name, and the name is going to be say John, right? And then we have the age, of 34. Then we have the I think is okay is okay so it's logged in, so we say it's logged in, then we give that to false or true in general. Of course the user is logged in. Now, so now that we have this, if we try to assign a new value to the name property here, so if let's say we take user info and we try to assign you try to assign a new, so we say user info dot name, and you try to assign a new value to it. So we want to say that we want to change the John to Kwame, right? You see that we have no error, but the moment we try to assign it to a number, we would get an error. You see that there's an error, or a boolean, right? Do you get me? Or an array, we still get an error, right? But why is this happening even though we are not defining types? Now, like how it was for the other ones, that's the same scenario that TypeScript is drawing here. TypeScript is basically saying, oh yeah, you pass the string, you pass the type string, or you pass the value, which is the type string, into the object key name, and then the same thing for the age, right, which was a number, and then this one is a boolean. So the moment you try to change a few things, see, I'm going to quickly change this boolean. I'm going to say user info dot is logged in. I'm going to quickly set that to false now, and you see no error, but I set that to a string of false, like just to give you the whole idea. You see that there's an error, right? If I say hello, it's still an error, right? If I passing an array, we get an error, right? But it has to be a boolean. Okay, now that we know this and we know how this works, let us declare this and then use it, right? So how are we going to declare this? Let me come here and say const, let me say did we say, okay, this has to be let actually, so that we can be able to manipulate the values, right? Because when you use const, usually you can't manipulate such values. Okay, so let's use let here. I use const a lot, that's why I think it just went over my head. But yeah, so we have user, right? Let's say we have, let's make it a user. I want to give it something cool, okay, user model seems like it will make sense. Then I'll say the name of this user is going to be a string. Okay, then I'm quickly going to say that the age is going to be a number. Okay, it looks like we are getting an error here. What am I not doing right? Is it this one? Yes, this one. Then yeah, right. So then over here, I think logged in, we are going to have to set that to a boolean, right? Now that we have this, we want to come down, and then I want to say that now let's assign, right? So we have the user model here, and then we want to assign it to the objects values here. So inside here, you can say the name part, and then for the name we can give it the Henry for the name, and then you can see that we still have an error. That's because we need to be able to use every property that we have defined up there, right? So here I can pass in the age as well, and I can say 23, right? And I can come and say is logged in, and I can set that to true. Okay, now you realize that the error is gone, but if I change here to a number, we have an error again. and if I change it to a string, even a string of true, we still have an error because it's a string. So it has to be a boolean, like how we defined it above over there. Okay, so over here, if I even try to call this, if I try to call this by saying user.model.name, we should receive, it should receive what? Kofi, another string basically. So you see there's no error. If I take this and I take the same name and I pass in a number, you realize there is an error. Right now, looking at how this one works, you can see that over here, like this. I want us to quickly come to this one. You see this user info here that we have, right? Let me quickly cut this. I'm cutting this so that it doesn't confuse you. I'm bringing it here and I'm pasting it, right? So look at this. You see that we just have name John, age 34, and it's logged in to be true. I want to add one more thing, right? So let's say we want to add the user email. Okay, so if I say what? If I say user info dot email, you see we are already getting an error. Even if you pass test at gmail.com, we still have an error because you can't assign a value that isn't there already. You get what I'm trying to say? Even if we don't do it like this, let me quickly cut this line. Let me quickly cut this line out, right? And then let's undo all of these things. Take them back to the original positions. Right, now look at this one. You see this one that is here. If I also try to push in a new value like the email that we have here, let me change this to user model. You realize that we still have the error because it doesn't work that way, right? We can't even use the email here. It doesn't work that way. That's what I'm trying to say. So how do we fix this problem, or how do we make sure that we can use something like this there, right? Let's clean this up. Let's clean this up. I'm going to clear this and I'm going to clear this. Now we are going to create a fresh one here. So I'm going to say something like let me say profile. Let me say profile. So I would say let's what? Profile. Then I'm going to say it's going to be what? We say the name or username of that profile is going to be a string. Then we have the followers. Followers is going to be an array of user IDs. So we can basically say string, because the user ID could be strings, right? So then over here I can say that I want maybe the email. You know what? Let's just keep it, right? So the email here, we want to say this email is also going to be a string, or you see for the followers, let's make this a number, okay, so that it doesn't confuse anybody. I want to keep things as simple as possible. So username, followers, number, email, string, right? Let's add one more thing. Maybe we want to add following. So let's say followers, following, and with that one we want to make it a number. Number. Yeah, right. And then we can add one more thing like a phone number too as well. Okay, let me take this one up. Okay, let me clear this. Okay, let's not clear it. It makes it complete. And the phone number too, we say it's a number. Actually, the position of the numbers don't matter. I'm just trying to make things simple so you understand them a whole lot more easier. So we have a profile, and this profile has a username, a followers number, like a number of followers, a number of followings, and a phone number, and also an email. Right now, it's not every user that is going to create that profile with a phone number or an email, right? So let's say for this particular user, they have the option of actually, let's say for this particular user, they have to always create their accounts with their phone numbers. Like let's say a platform like TikTok or something like that, right? They always have to create their profile with their phone number, right? But the email is optional, so I can just put this question mark there, right? Now you realize that before in the other one, when we're assigning the values here, it asked for the values compulsorily, right? Like it said that use every value that you defined here. But in this case, if we just define the four of these, we are good to go. If I bring this question mark here and then we define all of these, we are good to go. These ones make sure that it's optional, right? So let me quickly say profile, and then let me assign profile to its values. So I can say the username is Kofi, right? And then you see we are still having the error, and then Kofi's followers is going to be 3,000. Then followings is going to be, right, why does Kofi follow that many people? 1,000. And then we have the phone number of Kofi to be, let's make this a string actually, so it makes more sense. A string, sorry. Then over here we can pass in what's plus 233 whatever, right? And then you realize that after we did it, that everything is like okay, right? There's no error, right? If I clear this, you realize you have an error. But when I brought this, you realize that there's no error. That means you have an option to either add the email or leave it, right? So if I add the email right now, let me bring this one. I add the email, right? Let me add the email here. So if I say test at gmail.com, now you realize that regardless of whether it was there or not, there's still no error. But the moment I comment this out, there's an error, right? So basically that's basically it. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so now that we know how this conditional thing works, right, let's look at the type of any, and that's for that one is pretty simple. Even if I declare a normal variable, I say test var, and I declare this test var, and I say test var is equal to true in a string form, or let me not confuse you and say hello, right? And I take the same test var here, and then I assign it to a different value. Of a number, right? You realize there's no error. And if I take this and I say this is true, realize that there's still no error. That's because whenever you initialize a variable without a type, you're automatically saying that this is what it is, right? Like you're saying that it's a type of any. So whether you add, you can see here, so whether you add the type any or ignore it, it still takes it as a type any. And then the type any can basically receive any type of variable value, right? I can even add an object, right? And still it will still be, or see an array, and this would be an object, and it still works just like how we expect it to. All right, so in general, that's it. Even if I take like an array here, I say let's say test I say test let's test array, test r be any array, right? And then I come down here and then I assign test r to an array of values. You realize that I can actually put in anything, any value at all, right? But you see, you want to be very careful using this type, because you want to make sure that if you're using TypeScript, you're using it because of the type safety. Okay, the type safety is basically there to help you reduce the bugs, like I mentioned from the beginning. So
I mean, unless very very special cases that you use any. I personally don't use any myself. I think once, ever since I started coding, I think I used any once though. But you want to make sure that you're careful with this, because you're using TypeScript because of the type checking, right? And now you're using any just anyhow like that. Then why don't you just use JavaScript like that? Okay, so yeah, that's basically it. That's basically it.
Alright, so we quickly want to move on to functions, and I'm going to scroll down. Let me come here and let's create a new function. Got a function or functions, and then here we can say let new func, and then we can create this and have this just pop out, come out with whatever it wants to come out with, right? And you realize that it's perfectly okay, right? But okay, let's quickly say this. If we want to make sure that this function is bringing out a string or is returning a string, you're going to have to add a property to this side, right? So how do we do that? I'm going to quickly say this, right? Let me say new func string, right? And then over here I can pass in string property here, and then we are getting an error, obviously. So here what we can do is we can return a string, so hello, right? And you see that all the errors that we had is gone, right? Now we can even test it out much better with like maybe a number or something. So here I'm going to quickly take this, clean this, pass in a number, right? I'm going to pass in a number here. Then you see when I return hello, you see that there's an error, but I'll just clean this and return a number, and you see that it is all cleaned up. Now let us pass in some parameter and find their types too as well, right? So how are we going to do that? Now there are two things that I need you to understand. Let me copy this and let me say that, look at this new function. I want to say new func with params. Okay, I want to say new func with params. Now if I pass in a parameter, let's say I say something like num1, and I say that num1 should be, or let me just say num, right? And I set the num type to be number here, right? Number, sorry, here, right? And then I return, okay, you see I'm returning 4 but no error. But you let me just return this num inside the parameter. Then I'll try to call this function. I'll try to call this function, and then I'll pass in a number, right? You realize that it works how we expect it to work. But the moment I turn this into a string, then wahala. So basically you see that there's an issue here, right? So let me clear this, right? So basically this one that we have over here, let me correct it back to a number, right? So you see this one that we have over here, doing it like this too wouldn't hurt. It will still give us the same thing, right? But it's not necessary. I mean, the fact that you've been able to define your arguments types, so I can also define another type. So I can say num1, num2 here, right? And I can define that type to be a number as well. Okay, now that I've defined that type, I can say num1 plus num2, and then I would say 4 plus 3, and then you realize that it works, right? You realize that it works. Well, I mean, if we could have like a special situation, so let's say we want to be able to add an extra parameter, but it's not compulsory, right? What we can do is to say, so let's say we want to add index number, let's say you want to add index number, right? And index number is not compulsory, right? So what we can do is, you see that we've not called it yet and we are getting the error. So what we can do is just pass in a question mark here, and then we should be good. It makes it say that, oh, this is optional, you can either call it or not call it, right? And then it should work in our favor, right? So let's move on to the next thing. Now, moving on to uh, the next thing, before I talk about it, let me show you something real quick. I'm quickly going to scroll down here, and then now let's create like a new function. Let's say let weak func let a weak function be, then over here I can say that I'm defining maybe like a user info or something, or a product or something, product, right? I think user is much more easy to work with. So user, then I would pass in an object, so I'll say username. Then for the username I'll set it to the type string, right? So I can say string, and then for the, I think username has age, right? Then I'll set that to a number, and then I'll say that the user's phone number, right? So phone number, I want to make sure that that is optional, and I'll set that to a number as well. Now after this one, we use our arrow function, and then we return something. So we can return the user dot username or age, basically, right? So you see that this one is not giving us an error, right? Because I mean, it works. It's not like it doesn't work. It actually works. If I console log this whole thing, if let's say I take this out and I come and put it here, sorry, I put it here, I mean, it works. It's not like it doesn't work. Actually, it does work. Let me return. Right, so this, right, this here, okay, uh this is efficient, right? This works, right, but it's not efficient enough. I mean, let's use a much better option. I mean, that is where we come to talk about type aliases in TypeScript. Okay, so how do we define a type? We can say type user type. Okay, we can set the user type, and then we can say the username should be a type of string, right? And then after defining that, we can come down and say that the age of the user should be a number, right? And then down here we can also say that the user can have a phone number, which is optional, and that is also going to be a, let's make that a string. Let's make that a string. Let's make this a string instead. Why are we getting this error? So I'm basically going to have to add this. What we are going to do is, I'm going to come here and say let new function, or let's say new efficient function should be, we're basically going to say that this efficient function should have a user parameter, of which the type is basically going to use this user type that we set up there. Okay, so now that we have this, let us create our function, and then we can return the user dot username or age or whatever, and you see that it will work exactly how we expect it to. Right, now working with the types or the type aliases when it comes to function, so we can say func type, so we can set like bring the type keyword, then our custom name, so we can name this func type for the meantime, and then we have the equal to. Then inside this one we can set like the first variable or the first parameter, and you can set that to like a number, and we can set the second one to a string actually, right? Then we don't end it up with a void. Okay, then after, oh, I mistakenly closed this. Right, so after we've been able to set it up with a void, what would happen is here we can create like a new function and say new working func, right? And then I can say something like, you see this new working func, we need to actually define it that it should use the type alias that we set up at the top there, right? And then we do this. Now after we are done with that indication, we can now pass in num as our first parameter, and also a string as our second, or string, because looks like we can use a full keyword in there, right? So now after we've been able to do that, inside here we can now return a simple num plus string without any errors. Alright, now that we've been able to set this up or have this working, we want to move on to the next thing, or the next thing that is going to help us work with types. Alright, so after we are done with this, we want to move on to the next thing about types, right? So you see inside the user type that we set up over here, right? So let's come here, right? I'm pasting this user type, and then I'm going to like rename it. So I'll say user type 2, or let's say user type optional, because I'm about to teach something, right? So let's say we want to pass in only a specific value through this type that we are defining, right? Like, what if we want to pass in a specific value with this type that we are defining? Okay, now you see that sometimes in some apps you see dark mode, light mode, and stuff like that. We can use that same scenario, right? So let's say we have like a new property that we want to add. Maybe we can say theme or color theme, and then we can set it to either dark or light, right? Or light. Okay, so either dark or light, or maybe let me check my mic. Okay, it works. Either dark or light, or maybe you want to set up you see, when you're working with these buttons inside these UI libraries, you realize that they have these things like a variant of outline or contain. So we can even write this one as a variant as well. We can say what contained, or what outline. Okay, so with something like this, then we come up with our function. We can say optional func type. Then inside we can pass in this, and then say what user, and then we can say we want to pass in the user type optional that we created at the top there. Then we open and close the function. Let's console log this, and then say what you can set the user dot variant to be equal to what. You see that when I use the quotes here, you can see we have contained, and then we also have what outline as well, right? Of course. So basically, let me clean this, right? So basically that's it. that is basically it for the type aliases. And then another way we can also deal with this is that, you see, now we are using it for a function, right? But we can also create another object that can use this type, right? This type alias. So if we say something like let user variant, if you say let user variant be equal to the object here, so I can say username. So okay, now the reason why we are not getting these objects here is because we've not defined it to use this, right? So we can just set it to be what, the user type optional. Now when we come here and say username, we realize it comes up, then we pass in the value that we want to pass in. It has to be a string, right? So no mistakes. We set it to what, Henry as an example. Then we come down and then we say age, we say the age. Then after we pass in the age, so 34, then the phone number is optional, so we can choose to pass it or not pass it. But whenever we say the variant and then we open and you see that we now have these two options to choose from. So we can choose contained or we can choose outline. And in both of these places, if you change the value red, you see that there's an error coming. If I change the value red, you see that there's an, like, you literally can change the value if you set it to be an option. Okay, so let's quickly undo that and undo that. Let me set this to contained. Set this to contained. Okay, set this to contained. Then we can now move on to our interface. Right, so moving on to the interfaces, right? It's more like types, right? Let me quickly scroll down. It's more like types, but just some extra tweak, right? Or some extra feature, right? So here for the interfaces, I'm quickly going to create or define one. So this interface, we can name it admin, right? And then we can just open this up and then set it to, let's say this admin has a username. We are going to set it to a string, and then this admin is going to have an age. Let's set that to a number, and then this admin is going to have an email as well. Okay, this admin is going to have an email. Let's quickly set that to a string as well. Alright, now that we have this admin, let's say we want to say, maybe we want to put admins in, or maybe you want to create another interface, or you want to have another. Okay, let me show you something really quick, right? So over here that we have the admin like this, we can create like a variable and say something like new admin here, right? And then inside this new admin we have to show, so we have to define that it's using what, this admin interface here. Then here we say what is going to have a username of what, John Stone. I heard it from a movie I watched today, I think Lucifer or something. And then age, I'm going to set the age to 34, and I'm going to say that the email should be john@gmail.com. Alright, now you realize that we are all cool. Now what if we want to create maybe a subsection of admin? So let's say smaller admin, let's say something like smaller admin, right? So it's going to have basically everything that is here, but maybe let's add like maybe a boolean to check if it's actually an admin, or maybe a phone number or something, right? Let's try that really quick. So how we'll be able to set up this smaller group of admins that have the same properties that the normal admins have, but just something extra attached to theirs, is that we're going to call this interface and then say something like smaller admin as an example, and then we are going to say extends. Okay, then in extends, what's the admin that is above, so that means it takes all of these properties and more, right? Then inside we can say is employee then we can say what that is going to be a boolean. Alright, now that we have this, if I say something like let workers, if I say something like let workers, then I open this up and I say username. Okay, I have to define, so I'll say smaller admin. See, for the smaller admin, if I say username, you see that username appears, but this username is coming out from here, right? Then I can now pass into, I would say Emma White. I don't know who that is. Just made that up. And then over here I can add the age. The age here, I can, okay, the age is going to have to be a number, 32. And then you see that we still have errors because we still have the email, so we can pass in the email and say something like emma@gmail.com, and then you realize we still have the error. That means we are left it as employee, right? So let's not forget to add as employee, and then we set that to be true. Then you realize that we are all set. That is it for interface. We can now move on to generics. Right, so we want to move on to generics, right? So I'm quickly going to scroll down, and then we are going to have the topic here, generics. Now, generics should be pretty simple to understand. Now you have an interface, right? I'm going to quickly create an interface right now, and I'm going to say that this is a post interface, right? So post interface, I can call it that, and I would, so inside the post has an ID, right? And the ID is going to be a number, and then we have the title of the post. We have the title is going to be a string, and I think string, sorry, yeah, right. Then I think that post is going to have a description, and so description is also going to be string. Then let's say we want to add like a hidden info, let's say hidden, right? Or metadata, right? Metadata, let's say, okay, let's say, right? Now you realize that, you see, right, let me quickly break this down, right? So this post interface, there could be a situation whereby, let's say we want to create a post, right? But we want to make sure that we are passing some extra data to the post. So maybe the post has a category, or we want to pass the user ID that represents this post, or user IDs that own this post to it. We want to attach it to it, right? So I mean, what we could quickly do is we can create another interface here. So I can say something like, let me come and say interface, and let me say user info interface. Let me say user info interface, and then that one is going to take in the user ID as well. That is going to be a number, and then the next one is going to take in the username, right? The username is going to be a string, right? So a string, right? So over here, now that we have this, we want to maybe create another interface here and name that interface post category. Let's say that's the second metadata we want to pass to the post, right? We want to show that it belongs to this particular part or this particular data or something, category. So category, so here is going to it could also have an ID of a number, and also a okay, and also a name. So we can say the category name or something, or title, category name or category title, either way works. So title. Now you see that now that we have both of these, what we can do is inside this metadata here, we can say so this metadata here, that is the extra data that we are passing on to this interface, we either want to pass in the user info interface object here,
like as an array of data that we want to get from an API, or we want to pass this post category also to it as an array of data we are getting from an API, right? So how do we do that? We need to use the OR operator here. So we have the so what we can say is we can say this user info interface here, right? Then over here we use this OR, and then we use the post category here, right? Do you get me? So now that we have this, you see that there are no errors here, okay? But what if in the future, right, let's say we are passing in different types of metadata we can't really predict, right? How do we make sure that we're able to specify this, right? How do we make sure we specify it? So over here, what I can do is, let me quickly copy this interface. Let me scroll down and paste this one here. So you realize that over here, right, over here what we can do is we can actually set a variable, right? So over here we can set it and say like a parameter. Most of the time most people use this t, right? Like most people use this t that is here, okay? But so you can actually write whatever you want to write inside, but most of the time people use the t as a parameter, right? Then after that what they do is they pass in this t here, and then maybe an array or something, like if you want it to be an array. Did you get me? Okay, good. All right, so basically, right, it works, right? So basically now that we've been able to set this up, it means whatever we pass, if we want to use this interface anywhere, whatever type we pass, the data type that we pass here, that's the data type we are going to have to use inside this particular metadata section. So if I say let good buddy or test, let's say test var, right, should be test var, then we set this to be the post interfaces. We set this to be the post interfaces. I think, yeah, I made this one interface, but okay, let me make it interface 1 so that you don't get confused, right? And then over here I say that I want the data type to be a string, right? Now after this, if I quickly create an object and I set the ID to a number, so say 2 or 3 or whatever, and then I come down here to add a title real quick, and then I say the title should be test title basically, and then I come here and set the description to be a test description, and then I come to the metadata section here, so metadata, and then I say that this one should be an array, but the array should only be only the type string should be passed through this array. Then for that I can say my string 1, I can say string 1, then I can come and pass here string 2. Oh, sorry, I need to put it in my double quotes, so string 2, and then I can even extend it if I'm wicked and say, okay, yeah, right, so it's string 2 or string 3 basically, right? And then you realize that there is no error. Now what is some extra thing that we can do? So what we can quickly do is we can actually add a specification here, right? So what we can do is, you see, so looking at this particular one, right, let's create a new interface. Let me just copy this and paste this. Let's say post interface with limitation. I'm sorry it's getting long, but I need you to understand. So let's say t extends, then we say object, right? So that means you can't put in anything apart from an object, right? If I say t extend string, you can't put anything apart from a string, right, inside your array, right?
So here to object, you can't put anything apart from an object inside your array here, right? Now that we know this, right, let us create another test var here. So test var, then we say test var with limitation, test var with limitation. Then over here what we can do is we can pass in the object with its own types, right? So in type we want to say maybe an id of a number, so that extra metadata that we want to add, and then let's say maybe the title or something, or name or something. Let's say name sounds much better. So a name, and then we say that would be a string, right? So now that we've been able to set this up, you see that this one we are getting an error, but all we have to do is at least add one object into this array with this types, right, with this type values. So we can say one id1, we can say id1, and then passing the name, and then the name should be what, Kofi, right? And then you realize that there are no errors. And then if you want to add any extra values, we need to pass in another object. We can't pass in any other data type because we have set a limitation, one extra limitation, and then I'll say ama, right? Say ama, and then I'll set this to 2. Okay, and so yeah, that's how the one with the limitation works. Now what else can we do to this? Now another thing we can quickly do is, you see this section, you see that it's an object here, right, or sort of an object with its types right over here, right? So I mean, because of that, we can even use some other interface that we've already created, right? So we can even use the user info interface here, and then we can pass it in here. Okay, so we can pass it in here like this, user info interface, and then we just make sure that we look at this. You see this one has what's the object id here, and then the username here, right? And then the id is what, a number, and the username is a string, right? So because of that, we already have the id to be a number, and then this one is username, and this one is also a username. We can basically do the same thing for the category, right? So we can say copy, and then we can paste this with category, with limitation category, right? And then over here we can pass in what the, I think, is it category, what name did I give to it? Let me go back and pick it up. What name? I think I used post category, right? So I can say the post category here, and then I can just paste it inside here. And now this post category, what are the properties it has inside its interface and its values, right? We have the id with a type number, and then the title string, so we have to change them to fit. So over here, right, we have the id number, and then this one is a title, okay, and then this one is also a title. Okay, that's basically it for the TypeScript basics when it comes to generics and everything that involves the basics of TypeScript. I really appreciate you for getting to the end of this video. Hopefully I should be able to come out with other videos in the future. I'm thinking of coming out with the React TypeScript crash course too as well as time goes on, and I appreciate you once more for getting to this part of the video. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.